come to grips with the collapse of the Soviet Union, find its place among other states in Europe. And after that came Putin and Putinism, and it really rejected that Russia and said, no, the greatest tragedy in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. We want to build a strong Russia. We want to restore the greatness of Russia. And that then embarked on several different things. One of them was a ratcheting in of democracy at home in Russia. Law and order came first, but it didn't stop. And it was a real ratcheting in on democratic practices. Another was this sense of Russian, for lack of a better word, imperialist view of Russian-speaking people wherever they may be. That Russia felt a particular right to assert authority over all Russian-speaking people, and a particular desire to have decisive influence in the territory of the former Soviet Union.
What we were provided, so the government of Belarus invited a group of what they call distinguished visitors. This included NATO, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the OSCE sent 2 people. I was there representing the Helsinki Commission, and the defense attaches also had a program, the defense attaches that mostly were resident in Moscow, I should say. And then 7 countries on Belarus's periphery were invited by the government of Belarus to participate in a slightly more lengthy observation process that took about 5 days. But in the case of the distinguished visitors, such as myself, there were 2 main parts of the activity. The first was a briefing where the briefers from the Ministry of Defense offered us the scenario, the numbers involved, and concluded by assuring us what I think their main message was, which is this exercise is completely defensive in nature. Our neighbors have nothing to worry about, despite some of the more alarming rhetoric that you've heard, and Russian forces and equipment will be departing from our borders by the 30th of September, and Belarusian forces will be in their permanent stations as of that date as well. I won't get into the scenario that they briefed for the exercise in too much detail, but only to say that it reflects what Dr. Blank actually was talking about in terms of the Russian concern that a color revolution type of activity would be fomented from the outside, and in particular would split off parts of Belarus, or Belarus as a whole, from the union state of Belarus and Russia. So initially this was the scenario driven by a fictional country called Veshnoria. And folks, spoiler alert, Veshnoria lost. Okay? Lost the exercise. It's important to know, I didn't want to keep you on the edge of your seats for that. So, what assessments can I draw from having been out in Minsk and at the Borisov training range for what we were offered? Well, frankly, it was trying to understand the larger picture by looking through a straw. There really is very little that the distinguished visitors participating in this activity were able to gain in terms of understanding the scope and overall scale of the exercise. Of course, since I've been back, I've been paying very close attention to the policy community's writings on this and interacting with various folks. Everyone is still working on what their assessments are in terms of numbers. There's not necessarily an agreement as to what exactly this represented, the whole scale of the exercise looked like. Whether there will be an ultimate consensus is not necessarily clear either. We've heard the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of Europe of NATO already be quoted in the Washington Post as suggesting that the exercise was bigger than what we were informed of previously. What I can tell you is, and I would love to show you some video here, there was a lot of ordnance dropped. And whereas the scenario began with this idea that a kind of a color revolution in Belarus would be fomented by small groups of terrorists, what they were doing very quickly in the course of the exercise, and certainly by the end, was fighting a conventional war against a conventional opponent like NATO. The kind of running joke among the international observers was really, boy, these terrorists really don't stand a chance, you know, as we were looking at mushroom clouds coming up over the horizon. There seems, the reports from the ground seem to be that the Russian troops and equipment are in fact on their way out. I don't have independent verification of that myself. We haven't seen reports of the most alarming concerns that the neighbor states were were alerting us to prior to the exercise. No kind of land bridge to Kaliningrad scenario has occurred, so that's always good. But let me maybe conclude my remarks by giving you just a few of my takeaways from this overall exercise. So the first thing I think it's important to recognize is that Belarus, in some sense, really should be commended for providing some degree of transparency and inviting observers in to participate in this exercise, even if it was in this kind of distinguished visitors program. What that signals, you'll have to ask possibly Dr. Blank, experts on Belarus. There's speculation that this might be signs of a new openness of Belarus towards the West, an intent to really demonstrate their sovereignty even within the concept of the unitary state of Belarus and Russia. And of course, analysts will speculate that President Lukashenko really did learn some lessons from the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and has some concerns about his own nation's sovereignty. So again, regardless of the reasons, I think there are some hopeful signs that these types of invitations, and certainly the invitation to the Helsinki Commission, was a hopeful sign and it was appreciated.
Tactics for strategies, first of all. That's very common in America and in this town. Putting money in the West for safekeeping and at the same time trying to disrupt the West, I don't think they have thought through that contradiction either. They certainly are trying to disrupt the West, not to bring about the collapse of the banking and economic systems, which after all guarantees them their wealth, but rather to undermine the West's cohesion and capability to resist Russia's pretension to being a great power. And I don't think they have thought that through. I do believe there is a Russian strategy, and these are tactics within that strategic formation. But it's part of the human condition not always to recognize that there's an inherent contradiction between two things that you think you're doing in your interests. And the Russians are as prone to that as we are.